According to the narrative, a World's Fair is a fair held to show off the latest inventions and or the might of different countries involved. Today, we'll be taking a look at the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. Supposedly, it was built in 2 years, in a swamp, covered a full 690 acres, and was built of temporary materials such as concrete and a material called staff. More than 27 million people attended. The largest building, the Manufacturers and Liberal Arts Building, covered 32 acres, and the Ferris wheel, the first one ever made, was 264 feet tall, with 36 cars capable of holding up to 60 people in each, allowing a total capacity of 2,160 passengers. Chicago won a competition between several cities, including New York and Washington, D.C., and that's why it was chosen as the place of construction. Many architects helped design the fair, including and predominantly John Wellborn Root, Daniel Burnham, Frederick Law Olmsted, and Charles B. Atwood. Supposedly, they managed to design 690 acres of buildings in 2 years, and only another 2 years was needed for construction. They say they built everything except 2 buildings out of temporary materials. The mainstream reason for why it happened were more or less the following: to celebrate Christopher Columbus landing on America, to show off America's power, to introduce new inventions, innovations, and ideas. Now, let's look at some problems. Firstly, let's consider the waterways and bridges. Back then, digging a canal 1 mile long and 20 feet wide would have taken 2 to 5 years, and while there is no information on the waterways at the expo, this is a rather conservative estimate judging by pictures and diagrams. We are told that nearly everything at the fair was made of staff, this temporary building material made from a mixture of plaster and fibers that is known to be relatively weak. I quote, "not made for heavy load bearing," end quote. And they were building huge structures, the biggest of its day and the second biggest today, as well as large bridges that would have had to be able to hold dozens, if not hundreds, of people at a time. They tell us that these bridges are made of staff and supported by it in the water. But there is one slight problem. Staff is not water resistant. Well, that might be more than one problem. Not only are the staff bridges and bridge supports fully in the water, but there are fountains made of it. Every building except 2 were made of staff, and they had to withstand rain and a very harsh winter pouring snow onto them to be melted and ruin them. There is no way the intricate detail we see here could be made from staff and survive, even if the main building itself stayed intact. Not to mention that too many people on some of these buildings would have caused them to collapse. And yet there are millions of people everywhere. According to Google, it takes several months to a year to design a square acre building, and that's today with technology and AI. We'll round that to roughly 9 months, considering the size of some of these buildings, and that's still being generous. Now say you have around 60 designers, though there seems to be no data on the number of designers. Then the number of buildings times the time it took to design them divided by the number of designers equals 30 months. This is without any added time for the 32-acre building or the other buildings that were a good deal larger than 1 acre. Also, this is just the buildings, not including waterways, fountains, plumbing, electrical wiring, or any type of setback. And just in case you wanted to know, it would take 18 designers roughly 16 months to design the 32-acre building. Just in case you wanted to know. 30 months does not fit into 2 years of designing time given for the exposition, obviously. Now I'll leave off beating the dead horse of a narrative and switch over to the alternative. If these buildings weren't built in 1893, when were they built? Was this exposition what they say it was for? Now, let's consider the alternative. The theory about the buildings is that they were built as a part of an ancient advanced civilization that used a combination of steeples with antennas and cymatics to harvest energy from the air and work other wonders. This goes along with the Little Season theory and Tartaria, which I don't know enough about to talk about here. Yes, that was brief, but I promise I'll go deeper into the possible reason for the World's Fair itself. To do that, let's look at the Columbian Exposition Notebook. I'm just going to read from it, and then we can consider the implications. Here on the cover it says, I quote, "At institutes where hundreds of points are given each day for 2 or 3 weeks, a carefully kept notebook is of vital importance. If such a book be kept systematically, it will be consulted afterwards, otherwise not. In taking notes, give the gist in a few words. Verbum sat sapienti, unquote, meaning a word to the wise is enough. Now for the note-taking part of the book, it says, quote, use a page for each recitation. This book is large enough and paper is cheap. If nothing is gleaned from the recitation worth noting on this page, leave it blank. A blank page is often the most truthful record. When the heading above is filled out, the instructor and teacher are, all caps, charged with the hour, and this page shows up the account. By writing in a page continued from or continued on, each subject may be conveniently, all caps, read in a connected whole, unquote. This next bit is the only part written by its owner, and rather freaky too. It says, quote, if a child can see, hear, touch, and handle, he will begin to talk, unquote. Now here we have a list of people in the U.S. government. Next is a chart of political parties in America's history, all the way from 1787 to 1893 itself. Now this is a page on how to study. It says, quote, this book aims to give students suggestions and direction as to the manner and method of study. In the first 40 pages, it gives general suggestions on developing an active, healthful, vigorous mind, and points out the evil effects of bad habits of study and of thought. Next, it takes up the common branches separately, giving suggestions on the method of studying each. The last part is devoted to, all caps, character building, or the, all caps, development of man, as a work apart from the acquisition of knowledge. From the author's preface, we quote as follows, many people acquire knowledge, but few get wisdom. The manner and method of acquisition is of great importance. The faculty of acquiring and committing is not one of the highest order. In fact, it is often found in inverse ratio to the power to originate, apply, and utilize, and the wrong habit of acquiring knowledge may do more harm to the student than the knowledge itself benefits. Habits of thought and of life are more than knowledge, and habits formed in early life may render knowledge useless and even harmful. Many faithful, hard-working students often form plodding habits of thought that render their work, on the whole, more harmful than helpful. The advice so often given to pupils by speechmakers in schools to sit down doggedly to their work and keep at it, and you'll surely succeed in time, would be all well enough if the end and aim were to commit the Quran, Talmud, or Sacred Vedas. But the progressive educators believe more in unfolding the students' powers under proper conditions than in branding them with facts. Quote, acquisition should be more a means than an end. The ultimate end of study is not to make, but to cause to grow clear, active, healthful, vigorous, powerful minds. Not to acquire facts alone, but also the fire that dissolves all facts. This book should be in the hands of 3rd, 4th, and 5th reader pupils, a lesson assigned them as one class each day, and general recitation given for its thorough discussion. Special rates to teachers and county superintendents desiring large quantities to supply pupils. Unquote. Now here we have a quiz on what seems to be government and their salary. Alright, that is a lot to take in at once, I know. Firstly, I'll present my theory. This is obviously a book of education, and I believe it's a book of re-education after the old world was torn down and a new one was put in its place. I encourage you to re-listen to or reread this to get a better idea of the gist. As always, I encourage you not to take my words without research of your own, and I also encourage you to dig deeper into this topic, as I have only scratched the surface.